Welcome to the third module of the Solidworks Associate Prep. This is a module that is based on the features or three-dimensional functions in Solidworks. In this we're going to be going over some extrude and revolve, boss base, and cut functions, how to edit these features after we create them, fillet and chamfer, and some advanced functions. Also an advanced function of inserting some reference geometries such as an axis or a plane that we can use later on. So you can see in the example part we have a two-dimensional sketch here with a lot of dimensions on it, and then we have this three-dimensional part. This part extrusion, so we have a consistent cross-section here, has a specified dimension or distance that is C. So C is defined here as 43. And you'll notice in the sketch we have two closed loops. We have an exterior loop that defines the boundary. We also have a hole. So you could, for example, extrude a whole part and then sketch on this face and cut a hole through it, or you could just select this interior to be extruded, but not the hole. So you can make it in one shot. So we're going to go back to the part that we were working with before, and we're going to go to the Features tab, and we're going to extrude the boss base. So you'll notice it turns three-dimensional. I've got a few options here on what I want to extrude and how far. So firstly, I can choose what to extrude by dropping down this selected contours list, and it assumes that we want just this exterior ring extruded because it's between the two closed loops, but we could also want the interior extruded, or just the interior, or we could choose both. So it's really up to us what is extruded and what isn't. So let's say they're going to be extruded to two different amounts or depths. We can just choose one for now. So let's choose this one, and then we can choose how far. So blind tells us that we can just type an amount in here. This could also be equal to a global variable, so we can set that as say, A or C. Right. And then if we click OK, it would do that. We could also set it to a specified amount. We could choose it to go up to a surface. Even on up to a curved surface, then it would change how far it's extruded based on where the other surface intersects it, or offset from a surface, so we could have it pop out a certain distance, equally distant from a curved surface, or we can have it extruded as a midplane, which means at equal distance in both directions, or we can choose to have it extruded a certain amount in one direction, and if we check off direction 2, we can say how much in the second direction. So the reason for doing this is basically our top plane that we've been sketching on, or our front plane, excuse me, we may want to position that in a certain way to do advanced features on it and use that plane as some sort of reference, maybe to mirror something around or whatever. So I'm going to keep it simple and just extrude it blind to just maybe 10 millimeters. Okay. Now this doesn't look like 10, so I'm going to go check that by right-clicking Boss Extrude and editing the feature. And we'll see that it actually is still equal to C. So I'm going to make it equal to 5 millimeters. Okay, and now I might want to extrude the center of that sketch to a different amount. So I can drop down this box in my feature tree, select sketch 1, and then do another boss extrude. And now when I select my contours, I can select the interior, right click and delete sketch 1, and change the distance that I extrude this. Maybe it's 30. I can also untick merge result. So right now what happens is if I extrude this, these two extruded features will become part of the same solid body, which means any functions that I do on it from here on out will happen to both of them. If I wanted later to have a cut go through at some weird angle and only affect one of them, then I could leave these unmerged. Otherwise, most of the time it doesn't really matter, and I can leave them merged. I can also create a draft at the same time, so if I tick that off and set it, then you'll see what kind of effect it has. If I do it to a large extent, you'll see that it becomes angled outward. Most of the time we won't need to do that. I can also create a thin feature, which means that it uses the line that I've selected on the perimeter of that sketch and extrudes basically a thin line all around that sketch. So if I do it for 2 millimeters, then you'll see basically that it does a little wall 2 millimeters away from this line, and in direction 1 it will extrude out 30 millimeters. So I can change this with the reverse direction to go toward the inside of that line. Choose the line as the midplane for that extrusion, or make a wall on one side at a different distance away from the line than the other side. So that might be confusing, but you can play around with it on a more simple shape to understand what it does. Okay, so I'm going to extrude this out. And now you'll see that I have two features. I can hit Control Space Bar and choose a Trimetric View to see what my part looks like. I can go ahead now and sketch on any flat face of this part. So I can use my mouse button to zoom in and out to see different features. If I have zoomed very far away, I can always hit the F key on the keyboard to fit it to the screen. I can also right click on any surface and click normal to orient that normal to me. So maybe I would like to sketch on this top surface. I can click on the surface and click the sketch icon, or I can go to my sketch tab, click sketch here, and then it will ask me to select a plane, a planar face, or an edge on which to sketch for the entity. So I can select any flat face of my part, and it will start to sketch on there. So I can see that my origin is coplanar with that plane that I've just selected, and I could then begin to sketch entities on that face. I could set the size of the circle by doing my shortcut by right-clicking and dragging up. And I can set the position of this by adding some relations. So, for example, I can select the midpoint of this line by right-clicking selecting the midpoint, and then I want to align the center point of the circle with that, so I can make a horizontal relation between these 2 points. So if I hold shift, select the center point of that circle, and click make horizontal, I then lined up these 2 points. I can do the same thing with the midpoint of this line, and I can also do this by adding construction lines, which may be a little more simple. And then basically I would make sure that this point is coincident with the midpoint of this line. So I could right click, select midpoint, hold control or select the end point of this line, and then make those coincident. And that works because this line is vertical. If this line was not vertical, then that construction line could be angled and still satisfy that relation. But if I make this line vertical, it will be fixed. So the midpoint of this center point of the circle is vertical related to this midpoint and horizontally related to, aligned with this midpoint. At that time I can use this circle sketch to cut a hole through my part if I wanted, by going to the Features tab and doing an extruded cut. This circle would be cut any depth that I choose. I could drag this line. You can do the same for extruded boss base, dragging the line in either direction to basically cut. However, if it does not intersect this part, then you really don't need it, and it might give you an error if you were just cutting into this extra space, or this in a direction that you don't need to. So I can untick direction 2. I can click the checkbox to finish that operation, and we'll see that I've cut a hole through it. I can also mirror this feature that I've created about any plane. So say I wanted a hole on this side going through in this direction, I can click the mirror, and I can mirror this cut extrude, which was already previously selected. However, if it was not selected, I would just hover over this cut and click it. And then the plane that I want to mirror that feature about, I can just drop down this feature tree to show that the top plane is the one that I want to mirror it about. If I click that, I can click full preview to basically show, the intersection of the 2 holes in the middle of my part, and also this yellow outline, which basically is also telling me that this function is going to work if I have this yellow preview here. So I can click the checkbox and see that I have 2 intersecting holes in the center of my part. Now if I want to see inside my part, there's a couple of ways to do that. I can change my view here to something shaded without lines, or just a wireframe, or a wireframe with the hidden lines as well. So hidden lines could be, a sort of grayed, or we can show all of the lines in solid, but I prefer this one. So that's one way we can see sort of inside our part. Another way is to create a cross section, which is this section view. So if I click that, I can cut it on the front plane and translate that or rotate that with these rings or with this arrow. I can also choose the top plane or the front plane, and I can translate and rotate any of these. So if I want to cut it from sort of the top down, which will enable me to see all the holes at the same time, then I could use this front plane. I could also specify how far in that direction. So I can also rotate these as well. I could choose 0 degrees over here to make it flat again. And this section view is not a cut, it's just a way to view the part. So if I want to go back to the normal view, then I can just deselect the section view here. And maybe I want to create a new sketch, but I don't want to create it on the part or on any of these planes. I can create a new plane, which would be a reference geometry. So I can insert reference geometry and plane. And there's a couple of ways to define where my reference plane should be. If you've learned in linear algebra ways to define a plane, you can either select 3 points, a line and a point, or an existing plane. So what we'll do first is the easiest way is to select an existing plane and then offset our reference plane by a certain amount. So we could just say it's 10mm offset from that. You could also flip the offset to make it go to the other direction. You can create multiple offset planes, or you can select 2 planes or 2 faces, and it will automatically generate a mid-plane between those 2. So if I select face 1 and face 2, let's see. Okay. Well, usually it'll create a plane between those 2. So there we go. I've selected these 2 faces and a mid-plane has been generated there. So if I just want to offset a plane, I can click one and specify the distance that I want to offset. And click check. And if I wanted to sketch on this plane, I can just click on it and click sketch, or click on it over here and click sketch, or I can click sketch in the sketch tab and then select the plane. So one kind of cool thing is that when I'm sketching on a plane, I can do something called convert entities, which takes any lines that I select from my part and will project them onto my current sketch plane. So let's say I wanted to create an extrusion that's lined up exactly with this top of the part. I could select the top face, and you see all the lines that are sort of light blue here. If I click convert entities, it will project those onto my current sketch plane. Let's say that I don't want to use these lines as my extrusion, but maybe I want to offset these a certain amount and then extrude it. I can do Control A to select all of them, and then I can offset these entities by a certain amount, maybe 6mm. And if I select Make Base Construction, then when I use the checkbox, these interior lines will become construction lines. My only solid lines will be on the outside. Okay, and then I could make a feature with that. So another feature that we might want to use is a Revolve boss base. So I will make a simple Revolve sketch with this. So somewhere in my sketch I need to have a line to revolve around. And we're going to use a 3-point arc to create a semicircle. If I select the 2 endpoints of the line and then wait for a snap function, basically here, it shows me that this will be exactly a semicircle or a half circle. I can revolve my half circle around this line. If I dimension this line, you'll notice that it changes. I can make the radius of this circle equal to exactly half of the diameter by writing in a function I can make this normal to my view by right-clicking Sketch 3 and doing normal to, and I can revolve this by going into the features, revolve boss base, and making the axis of revolution the center line of this sketch, and that will make a sphere. Now there's some more parameters here. I don't have to make it go all the way around. I could make it a half sphere if I wanted to, or 3/4 or whatever. Okay, so I can go back and edit, some functions by just right-clicking and clicking Edit Feature, and then maybe I want to change the distance here. So then you can also edit features. Then maybe I want to round off some edges. For example, in 3D printing, sharp edges are not usually desired because they may be stress concentration areas and may make the part weak. So I'm going to delete some of these things. You can see that if I delete something, if I delete the plane, the sketch is on the plane. So it is dependent on the plane. So if I delete the plane, the sketch that is on there will also be deleted. So I can click yes. You can see that function that I've created was also dependent on the sketch 3, where I made the radius equal to half of the diameter. So I can go manage these equations and right click and delete that equation. Okay, so say I want to add some fillets, which is basically rounding off edges. I can choose an edge that I might like to round off, and I can choose how much to round it off. Or if I just click it, I can also see these icons pop up, which says maybe I want to fillet a lot of things all at the same time. So if I select all of these edges, see that it will fillet all of them 5mm, and then I can right click to make that happen. And say I want to fillet all of these edges 2mm. I can click that, and that will happen. I can also make a chamfer. Chamfer is like a beveled edge. So if I choose the edge, in a full preview, you'll notice that it only works if I have that preview. That's when I know it's going to work. So it could be not working because the dimension is too big. So a good way to check that is just by making it very, very small. I could also select the whole face. So if I make this 2mm, then I see that it works. The reason it would not work is maybe it intersects with another feature. So it's probably intersecting with these holes here. I can also change the degrees at which it happens. or flip the direction so that it is steeper or more flat, which side it's going to bevel. Okay, so if I choose that, then you'll see it makes the slanted edge. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is edit one of these features. I'm going to edit the hole that I've cut to show you the offset from surface parameter. So if I go right click this and click edit feature, instead of cutting it through the entire part, I'm going to cut it offset from the surface. And the surface that I'm going to offset it from is this one here. And basically I'm going to make it 5 millimeters from the end of the part. So you can see that it will either stick outside the part or stay inside the part. Okay. And it may not work because the circle is now maybe intersecting two surfaces. So to fix that, we could edit the sketch. So if we edit the sketch instead, we can move this circle to the right. So the thing that is sort of tying them together is this horizontal relation. So instead of that, we'll do that. And then we can edit this distance to make it 12. Now if we exit the sketch, it will have updated everything. And this cut extrude will now intersect only this surface. So now we can go back, edit the feature, and try it again, offset from surface, and try 5 millimeters offset from this surface. Let's see. Okay. And there we go. So now our mirror function does not work. Unless we click geometry pattern. So you'll notice sometimes you have to play around with the features to get them to work properly. If we then choose our section view, we can see that the offset worked and that they're offset from the surfaces by 5 millimeters.